Without challenge, there can be no change. Listen to some stories from my recent past as well as way back to see how I overcame some of the challenges and phobias I had. I'm a skinny guy. My percentage body fat is really very low. So my natural insulation from the cold isn't great. I've always loved swimming, but even in sunny South Africa as a kid, I'd be one of the first out of the pool, literally turning blue. In my teens, I took up bodyboarding and skid diving, as we used to call it back then, in the cold Atlantic. I had a wetsuit that helped me, but this allowed me to stay in for longer, but afterwards, warming up would take hours. Nowadays, after living in the UK for more than 20 years, I'm more conditioned to the cold weather. But I also have great gear to help keep me warm in all conditions, like when I'm out hiking and camping in the mountains, whether that's in wet Wales or at altitude in the high mountains in Spain. But I'm still not a fan of cold. In fact, I would often refer to myself as a coldie, someone who doesn't like the cold and gets cold easily. But I've overcome aversions before. I used to be scared of heights, and then I ended up scaling rock faces on multi-pitch climbs and working on the outside of high-rise buildings high up in the air, cleaning windows, dangling 20 stories up at the end of 2 long ropes, one tethered to a wooden seat, the other to my climbing harness. On my first big job, I had to hang for about 20 minutes waiting for some equipment to be lowered down. I was in full fight-flight mode, and my heart rate at rest, just sitting there, was about 140 beats per minute. My resting heart rate in those days was around 48. But without the distraction of having a job to do, just sitting there feeling totally exposed and vulnerable. I knew if something went wrong, I was dead. In that moment of extreme fear, I did 2 things. The first was make a conscious decision to trust my equipment. This reduced the mental anguish I was having. The second was more of an innate response to just focus on my breathing. These 2 things acted like a switch, and I overcame my fear of heights in an instant. This doesn't mean that when I'm high up on a via ferrata looking down a 100-meter cliff that I'm not scared. But I'm able to control, or rather to meet and moderate that fear so that I can move upward and enjoy being in nature. The views from up there are beautiful. Then there were confined spaces. Like many people, I considered myself claustrophobic. Yet in my early 20s, I ended up on a leadership course at the front of a group of fellow students crawling through narrow tunnels in the Precambrian limestone of the Kango Cave Range. Not in the touristy part with the wide tunnels, well-worn paths and coloured lights. We were much deeper into the 4-kilometre range with only one small entry and exit hole, smaller than a manhole cover, which we were lowered into. The tunnel we were crawling through got narrower and narrower, and finally we got to a point where the only means of propulsion was by inching forward 1 toe push at a time. In situations like these, you have 2 options, or maybe 3 if you include not getting into them in the first place. Option 1 is to freak out and panic, which just leads to more panic and complete overwhelm. I realized that it will only make the whole situation and the sensation of being squeezed on all sides 50 meters below the surface so much worse. In fact, the more I thought about this, the more it amplified my fear. I told myself, well, people had crawled through these tunnels before. I then consciously relaxed my body and again intuitively just focused on breathing. This time the air was dusty and dank, ancient air, unlike that up in the city. I then realized that in this relaxed state, my body was more bendy and soft and snake-like. This made my subterranean journey almost enjoyable, as I felt myself slithering towards the destination. a massive underground cavern filled with sparkling stalactites dripping from the cave ceilings and the stalagmites rising up to meet them. I was then able to share and tell the other overwhelmed novice speleologists my process, allowing them to do the same on the return journey. It was with the same confront my fears attitude that I signed up for the Wim Hof experience in Kent a month ago. If you haven't heard of the Iceman, a quick search will give you lots of info on the amazing story, his world record breaking feats. He attributes all of these to the 3 pillars of his technique: breathing, cold exposure, and mindset. I'm already familiar with some breathing techniques, and I facilitate a group using breath work sessions, something I've engaged in after experiencing some profound and amazing transformational effects in my personal life using holotropic breath work. I've continued to learn more about the beneficial effects of different breathing practices, but most of all, I wanted to challenge my aversion to the cold. With a colleague hosting an event just down the road in Kent, I finally felt ready to do this. On this 2-day seminar, we were guided by a Wim Hof technique instructor. She gradually led us through breathing protocols, and we finally completed 2 minutes in an ice bath. Have a look at these photos and watch my transformation into a cold lover. Well, almost. It was cold for sure. The first immersion was 1 minute, and I attempted to muscle my way through it with a sort of no pain, no gain approach. Not much fun, but I was really chuffed to have done it. On day 2, we did the second round. I managed 2 full minutes in the ice bath. This time I managed to get my arms in, but still not my hands. I was learning better to use my breath and embrace the cold. The third and final round, I managed to get my hands in for the full 2 minutes. I was able to accept the signals my body was sending me and just trust that my body would react in the right way to the signals my mind was sending to it. So just like chiropractic, it's all about those mind-body signals. Do you often feel anxious, stressed, or fearful? Or do you want to get over some challenge? Or perhaps you just want to learn the hows and the why of breathing better. I'm going to be holding a workshop for people who want to learn more about the benefits of breathing and give you some practical breathing techniques that you can incorporate into your everyday life and exercise and mindfulness practices. Click on the button below and we'll contact you and get you set up for the workshop.